Hello everybody, and welcome back to Writing the Rapids, the show where I, Joe Bielecki, talk to writers about writing. Very often those writers have been recommended to me by writers who have previously been on the show. In the case of this month's guest, PJ Lombardo was recommended to me by Jake and Benson, so if you like this episode, go back and listen to those, and if you liked those, stick around. PJ Lombardo is the author of The Blue Cherub from Colt House Books. He lives in Baltimore, Maryland, and serves as co-founding editor of Grotto, a journal of grotesque surrealist poetry. His writing can otherwise be found in Notre Dame Review, New Mundo, Ghost Harmonics, and more. Before we get into my conversation with PJ, let's remind you that you can help out the show for just $2 a month over at patreon.com/noisemakerjoe. If you choose to do so, you get these episodes a little bit earlier than everybody else does, and it makes me feel happy. You can also toss me a one-time donation over at paypal.me/noisemakerjoe, and you can buy my book. It's called Tired. It's on Amazon, or you can drop me a line for an e-copy. Otherwise, tell two friends about the show. Like, comment, subscribe, repost wherever you do post, and just keep on being you. Now, without further ado, let's get into my conversation with PJ Lombardo. The term that comes up a lot when I'm looking at stuff relating to you online is surreal grotesque. Or surrealist grotesque, depending on where I'm looking. And I remember I was at a show. It was in between bands, and I was furiously Wikipedia-ing grotesque. And it's got kind of a long history of like what it means. But I kind of landed on something that's kind of like so ugly you feel bad about it rather than like horrified by it. And surreal also kind of has like a troubled contemporary definition. So I want to start with you telling me what surrealist grotesque means to you.
Yeah, so that is you're right about the long history that grotesque has and the fraught history that both of those terms have, I think. They're referred to quite nebulous categories of more like reaction sometimes, the way that people use it. They are describing a feeling they had viewing the work of art rather than the components themselves, which is not always necessarily a negative thing to do, especially over the course of a conversation. But I think having a little bit more of like a materialist understanding of that term has been like helpful for me. So my fascination with, there's always been surrealist poets that I really loved, like Andre Breton, Tristan Tzara, M. Césaire. Like I would even like Paul Celan, people who maybe weren't formally in that school, but were using a lot of those techniques, like neologisms, fractured syntax. They were all writers that I'd looked up to for years. And I was in a class with former, I guess you could say, friend of the pod, friend of the Writing Rapids pod, Johannes Göransson.
Mm-hmm.
I was in a class with him, and I think it might have been a different section class, but I believe it was when I'd like rewritten one of the books of Endymion. Like I had a poem that was like a rewriting of part of Keats's Endymion. Okay. And he was talking about the grotesque as a form, and his understanding of it evolved from cave paintings that were done in like grottos that they discovered in like Europe, right? And what these paintings often depicted were three things: metamorphosis, autonomy, like, or not autonomy, anatomy, and like typically like complicated anatomy in some way, or like misrepresentations of anatomy, and hybridity, right? So you would see these like, and there's a book called Cave Art that gets into this too, but you would see these drawings of like men, like stick figures basically with like antlers coming off, or like deer heads, or you would see just like drawings of like penises and vaginas, and like specifically like taboo anatomy was like featured in these. So those three factors, I would say, anatomical misrepresentation, hybridity, and metamorphosis are what I look for when I think about whether or not something is like properly grotesque in that way. And these were just fascinations, like those features and some of the features of surrealism that I brought up earlier were always things that I'd like included in my art almost reflexively. Like it was just like these were the items that were fascinating to me. So having it all laid out in that class, it was really gratifying, and it was something I knew I wanted to explore more.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting thing to have happen, where this like naming of something that's inside of you that's like already coming out of you happens. Like I see this in musicians a lot, where a musician won't, generally on the internet talking, won't want to like learn music theory because they're afraid that, like, I don't know, if I start thinking about melody and harmony too much too academically, then it will like dim the sort of natural sparkle that I have. But it sounds like this is the opposite of what has happened to you, where having those things kind of named so that you can like look and explore more and see what other people have been doing with regard to, you know, those cave paintings and the work being done on those has like kind of benefited your art rather than gotten you too in your head about it.
Yeah, I think that is a really interesting comparison. And I've heard so many different versions of that reticence to like learning music theory or like learning about technique and crafts. Um, I yeah, I can definitely empathize with people's concern about losing spontaneity,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that spontaneity does not have to be sacrificed when you learn craft. In a way, you're almost freed up to be more spontaneous if you know what you're doing like immediately. You can think about whatever job you might have had at some point in your life that was like particularly difficult at first, and then by week 2, 3 of you doing it, like you just weren't even thinking and it was like more automatic, right? So that's what craft I think allows me to do, is it allows me to take more risks. I also have like a positive association with craft and art because I guess the phenomenon of like de-skilling, does that like term, is that like a familiar?
It's ringing a bell.
Yeah, so the idea of like de-skilling is that if a population's economy becomes like financialized, the majority of people that live there won't have like what Marxists would refer to as like productive labor capacity. And I think you can like see that happening. Anybody, I'm sure there's like English teachers listening to this, anybody who like has to deal with somebody who has maybe gotten away with writing an AI essay for years and years on end and had to correct that, can attest to the reality of de-skilling like in the United States. So I think that an emphasis on crafts is that's like it runs counteractive to that process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, right? Like feel less, learn more. Maybe that's an incorrect way of saying it, but like I get what you're saying, right? Of like we are at a point wherein thinking about what you're doing in and of itself like makes the thing unique, right? Caring enough to learn and then doing based on the learning. Yeah, there's that the Backrooms director guy, Kane Parsons. There's that clip of his with regard to AI floating around a lot where he's talking about how if he notices something is AI, it shuts the curious part of his brain off, because he says, okay, well, you made the decision to be, I forget the exact word. My brain wants to say flippant, but that's not the word he used. But like, to just kind of not care about, like, oh, the background. So what other decisions are you choosing to not care about? Yeah, and like, yeah, craft is interesting. I think about a lot of like the guitar based music that I like. I guess I'm still stuck on music, but like, oh, there's a fire truck. Of like, you know, punk band A's first album is their most like raw, scuzzy album, and people like that one the best because it feels the most, you know, raw and energized. And then by album 2, 3, and 4, they kind of know what they're doing, and they're doing it well, but there's this element of knowing what you're doing that, again, has sort of dimmed the sparkle, maybe. And maybe that's like not even the case. Maybe it's the fact that by album 4, 5, 6, they are kind of just tired of playing punk music and are required to. But yeah, I mean, I would say that I think that craft is probably something that people should think about. I'm trying to like place a bunch of things in my brain at the same time and string them together. My daughter has been really into Magic School Bus lately, especially when I'm around, because she knows I like that show the best of the shows that she's currently in rotation watching. And well, if Dad's here, I want him to be paying attention and involved, so we'll watch Magic School Bus because Dad cares about that the most. And rewatching all of those, because as a kid I had seen all of them several times just on TV. We watched a lot of PBS and Fox Kids, and so I know Magic School Bus. And there's this interesting thing where I'm by no means well versed in aerodynamics, but will watch the airplane episode and I'll be like, oh, I definitely know all of this because I have watched the show and it is somewhere lodged in my brain. And I feel like when it comes to writing, like, yeah, talking about Johannes, like, knowing the term ekphrastic has benefited me because it kind of, in the same way that, like, the Grotesque has, like, named a thing that was already happening, ekphrastic has, like, named a thing, especially in poetry, that has, like, kind of been there for me. And then, yeah, if I want to, like, get better at it, it's really easy to go from there to the reason for the term, the reason why the term is necessary. That was quite a lot out of me.
No, yeah. So I guess another example I can think of from my life where that was particularly true was neologisms.
Mm-hmm.
So for anybody who's not familiar, that's like when you combine either different parts of a word or two different words and coin a new term for specific usage in a poem. I started doing that, I guess, when I was around 20 years old. And I had read a little bit of Salon at that point, and I had noticed it in some other poems, but I kept calling it like the compound word technique.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Very fascinated with the compound. And I had written like a brief essay on the role of the compound word technique, which was influenced by all types of misconceptions that I maybe had at that period of my like writing career. And then I like went in to workshop it, and the professor was like, okay, so it has this history, and was like, was able to explain it in a way that made it make more sense. I think specifically just to jump back to the idea of like keeping momentum across a variety of projects. I think with bands, the decay is it's definitely there, but I think it comes from a different place. Like most musicians are working collaboratively, right? So what you have to get is like four, maybe five people, however many, to all be physically in the same place, in touch with each other enough to like have a polished product and be in the same headspace in some way,
Mm-hmm.
right? They all have to kind of share a patina, and that everybody's gonna drift as time goes on, and they're gonna find different things that's one feature of it. The other thing I think that is maybe more visible for artists who work primarily by themselves is they'll have a reaction to their work, and then that reaction will inform their self-conception in some way, and then it becomes more about that,
Mm.
right? Then they're like thinking more about responding to their audience and to their audience's perception of like who they are,
Mm-hmm.
and it's actually drifting from craft. So the thing you love to do, like writing poems or making music or whatever you were doing, now it's like you are having this conversation with like a bloated version of yourself, a bloated and like incorrect version of yourself. That's how I think of it anyway.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. Oh, yeah. I think you're right. And I think that should make anyone who's afraid of learning craft to not be afraid of that part of it. I also think learning is fun. There's the idea of you can't or what, you have to know the rules. One should know the rules before they break them, so you know how to break them. And the more you learn about a specific kind of art, writing or music or painting or whatever, the more you realize that there's like way more facets to it than you initially thought in high school, right? Like, I remember feeling very clever, thinking, oh, if I don't attribute dialogue in this novel, it will do X, Y, and Z things. And like, but dialogue is like very basic. Dialogue attribution is like very basic rules of writing, right? And if I had kept learning, or as I keep learning, I will learn other rules that I had never even conceived of as rules, right? Like you learn the 3-act structure, and then you realize that Joseph Campbell was a weirdo, and so you learn other structures that are already existing in reaction to that. But if you didn't know those and you just say, I will do my own hero's journey or an anti-hero's journey or whatever without all that other context, you are missing out, right? You're missing out on groundwork that has already been laid for you, that you can react to. And then I guess, especially if you're young, it's kind of a bummer to realize that you're actually not doing something super original, right? Like, I had written that novel without the attribution long before I had ever read JR, right? And granted, I was doing it, the dialogue not being attributed was working in a different way than Gaddis was doing in JR, but like, I was like, oh, I've never seen something like this before, so no one's ever done it. And I've definitely read, 200 books up to this point, so there must be no books like it.
But I think there is something profoundly comforting about like finding a context for what you're doing, especially in writing, which is necessarily done at least partially by yourself. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
guess you could find ways to work around that if you wanted to experiment in that way. But for the most part, writing is done in solitude. And it's always been gratifying to be able to place what I'm doing in like a certain lineage. Like I did have and this professor, like super nice guy, but I think maybe like we just had different tastes or something.
Mm.
So he would say to me once, he was like, well, there's nobody else who's really ever done what you're doing. You're doing something totally new. And I think he meant that in like a positive way, but I think it, he was also saying that there's like, I wasn't making use of my context as best as I could have. I wasn't like applying the history of the craft as well as I possibly could have, which he was correct about. But I think that is like, it's actually been gratifying for me. Maybe when I was younger, I would have had more of like it would have gotten stuck in my craw if I felt like I was doing something derivative.
Mm-hmm.
But I, as I grew up, I started to feel more rewarded by that than like repelled by it.
Sure, I like that. I want to move into the book specifically now, and especially with how you were talking about grotesquerie. The image of the cherub feels kind of not grotesque to me. Kind of like immediately not. And to have them be referenced so often throughout the book, I'm very curious about that.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess like broadly, my style is grotesque surrealist, but I don't necessarily approach. If that label no longer became applicable for me, I would be okay with that too.
Gotcha.
I will say I might push back on them not being grotesque according to the definition that I've lined up earlier.
You know, as I
So
was saying it, I was like, oh yeah, I bet you could make an argument against that. So go
yeah,
ahead and do it.
I mean hybridity, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's like they have some human features and some like heavenly features. There is the idea of them like being transient between worlds, so there's metamorphosis to me. There is an emphasis on like anatomy, right? Like you're struck by their physicality more than anything else. I would say, yeah, like that is it is a classically grotesque image for me, but it's not like nasty. The word grotesque, the problem with it is it sounds too close to gross.
Yeah.
So like even when I say it as somebody who has a conception of it that's different than that, I can feel the connotation leaking in. As far as how I chose that specific image for the book, I think it had something to do with this like a haunting quality. Like Satan was a cherub, Lucifer was a cherub. That was his role, right? So I thought of the Blue Cherub specifically as this like social ill that could be located in our immediate milieu, like when I was writing the book. Had to do with defeatism, right? And I'm not going to get any further. I'll let you talk a little bit more before I start rambling. But yeah.
Sure. Is Blue Cherub like an established thing within the sort of Abrahamic mythology, or is that yours?
Not in particular. So the color blue came from, I was watching a lot of horror movies at the time.
Okay.
In particular, I was watching in older horror movies like Y2K and before. They would use a lot of like blue light, especially to represent moonlight.
Mm-hmm.
And the one film that struck me, like where I had the kind of like, it provided this vector for me to write the book, was Ju-on the Grudge, so the Japanese version of The Grudge, which is an amazing movie if anybody hasn't seen it. Have you seen that, Joe? Have you seen it?
I haven't, no.
Okay, so in the film, there was like a domestic murder, like this husband killed like his wife and his whole family in this house, and anybody who passes through this house has to deal with these spirits that are inhabiting the house. They have this whitish blue paint all over their bodies, and I was thinking about the color blue in relationship to horror films and how it's seemingly a contradiction, right? Because blue is often like associated with melancholia, and horror, like the reason people go to see horror movies is they're like adrenalinic, right? They're shocking you in some way. And I thought this film in particular had this real satisfying balance of like shock and melancholia kind of wound into one. And thinking about the act of watching these horror movies that are drenched in blue moonlight, and there's something legitimately horrifying happening on screen, but because you have that infinite distance between yourself that the screen provides, right? That distance, I think it numbs you to the reality, and that felt just very true for what life is like in the beginning of the 2020s. Is being bombarded with like images and abstractions of violence, and having this sense of subdued powerlessness while it was passing through. So the Blue Cherub, it's not like I couldn't equate it to a single entity, but it's like a spirit that I see injecting itself into the troposphere and just like leaking down onto human life.
Right. I gotcha. Which kind of like, because the color blue, divorced from cherubs, even like arrives in many of the poems. So it's like this kind of constant thing. I liked how the fact that you tell me you were watching a lot of horror movies at the time makes the second section of the book make a whole lot of sense. So Motions is poems that are largely after horror movies, not entirely, but largely. And I gotta tell you, I feel like I haven't seen many of them, though I am aware of a lot of them. Crash, and I've definitely seen Mad Max. I won't go and tell you everything, but I like that. I like the sectioning because it I don't know, it felt like they were kind of all surprising, like looking at the contents, kind of surprising that you would have 3 subject or sections like this. But like, I don't know, tonally there's a cohesion. Did you what's the way I want to ask this? Did you have like each section kind of as like its own thing, and then you looked at them and said, I can put these together into a book? Or were you planning on writing a book and wanting to section it up?
Yeah, so the format of the book, for those who haven't read it, there are 3 like shorter lyric poem sections, and then a 4th closing section with a long form piece.
Yeah.
It wasn't all planned out from the beginning, but I had, when I'm looking to compile a collection, let me back up. I'm a collection based writer, right? Okay. So I have like a series of motifs, or a variety of motifs that I think are relevant to contemporary life in some way, that I want to like embody for one reason or another. Not because I think they're necessarily positive trends, especially in this book, but just because I think that they are extant in daily life, and I want to like bring them to the foreground. So I knew I wanted to write about defeatism because it just felt so ambiently present in like the early 2020s. Not that it doesn't feel that way now often, but I think that the specific brand that I'm encapsulating here was like accelerating at a very rapid pace during that time.
Right. Pandemic fueled.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The pandemic just like subdued everybody in a lot of ways. And then I think a lot of what was happening politically, at least in the United States, in the early 2020s was this sort of passive, like, this is the way things have to be, like, not like outside of like whatever fringe political circles most writers are involved in, like your average American citizen was just like, well, we're just accepting this.
Mm-hmm.
Even if we have a great deal of discrepancy between what I believe and what my tax dollars are doing in Gaza or whatever, just as like a really obvious example. So I had these motifs I wanted to hit on, and I just started drafting, and the formal constraints that were producing the best work, they ended up being like they ended up structuring each sequence. So part of that is to help myself organize what I'm doing, help focus myself. Like, even though I do love craft, I also love spontaneity. So
Mm-hmm.
I want to make sure that I'm not getting lost in that. It's also to guide readers, right? Like, if somebody isn't used to reading poetry with the same degree of like enjambment or fracturing or like linguistic play that I'm using, I still want them to say, okay, but in every poem or in like most poems, you're bringing this up. You're like each in motions, the second section you're referring to, every poem is like after a film other than like a couple that have like other ekphrastic sources. But I think that provides like a degree of reassurance to the readers, and allows me to focus what I'm doing.
Yeah. It occurs to me, the dance between spontaneity and craft, do you find that one is often coming before the other, or is it like as needed? So you kind of write a poem without thinking about academicizing it, and then you come back in the editing stage and you say, okay, now this is coming into like, I don't know, this tradition or this idea, or I'm using this method, and I'll use that to sort of inform how I shape the poem into its final project.
Yeah, I don't know if I could necessarily chronologize it like that, and put one before the other. I mean, when I'm even just like a quarter of the way into a collection, I typically, like, I know what the motifs are.
Mm-hmm.
I have the theory for it already figured out. But the way I always wrote, even when I was a kid, was kind of, we'll call it like maybe semi-automatic, right? It was
Mm-hmm.
just like I was never fully in control of what was the ideas that were like occurring to me. I was obviously, the writers are in control of what they put on the page. Like, I don't really like that mythology, but I wasn't. I was allowing myself to just let thoughts happen,
Mm-hmm.
and then yeah, go back maybe later, and I mean, I have extensive editing process too, so
Okay.
that's chronologized for sure. But
Okay.
yeah.
Tell me about that. The idea of editing poetry is, I know I've talked to a lot of people about it at this point, but it's still kind of shrouded in the sort of magic that only amateurs have when they look at someone doing something well.
Well, yeah, I don't know if there's like a one size fits all secret for it. My editing process is, I mean, my editing hygiene has grown substantially better over time.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I've learned to do is, if you want to have a collection that has a smooth tone, if you want to have a sequence that is like smooth, you're gonna have to like, the stuff you wrote at the beginning is going to undergo way more edits than the drafts you were writing at the end.
Mm.
Like, the drafts that are most representative of the collection of the sequences in Blue Cherub, they're the ones that are occurring later on in each sequence for me. Like, I am figuring it out over time, and I kind of have to erase the I think Jory Graham called it scaffolding. I have to get rid of like the scaffolding after I feel a little steadier in whatever I'm doing. And these collections take a substantial amount of time to write. I think Blue Cherub, it was, do the math right quick, like with all the editing we did, that was like a little bit more than 2 years. So a lot of the feelings I had that informed the book at the beginning had changed drastically.
Yeah.
By the end of the writing process.
Tell me about the image of the mill, which is on the cover and then arrives as very persistent through particularly that second section again. The idea of a mill is interesting. One sitting on a river, like an old-timey sort of like, I don't know, inside that wheel is helping you grind something, I guess. But where did that come in, and talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, so I live in Baltimore, and there's just a lot of like post-industrial infrastructure that's just kind of sitting there. That's part of the, like, just if there's any, like electronic music fans or rave fans or whatever, that's a lot of the electronic music comes out of Baltimore because those warehouses would shut down and then people would like have events in those warehouses, like stretching back to the 80s. So there's lots of abandoned mills around. That might have been part of why it was in my head, but specifically the water mill, and the shape of the water mill is the same shape as like a film reel, right? So the mill sequence, or the mill motif, primarily, as you pointed out, Joe, takes place in motions, which is the filmic sequence. So to have that parallel, I thought, it's like harmony. When you hear a harmony, you're not necessarily reacting to like the different notes from like a critical place. You're just like feeling the disparity between the notes, and it's like adding to the emotion of the experience. It's part of what I was looking to do there. That sequence in particular, the way that film intersects with the theme of defeatism to me, and I've already kind of touched on this, is just the speaker in those poems is letting their life collapse, right? They're letting everything just infrastructurally deplete around them, and they're like hewing themselves to images in order to detach themselves from the dilapidation, right? So having the image of like an abandoned or collapsing mill also served the atmosphere.
Right. Which also explains why termites, like the cherubs, kind of get replaced or change into termites through as the book moves from the first section to the second section, which was another thing I wanted to bring up, but I feel like you've answered that.
Well, a fun fact about the termites thing is I was inspired to do that because there were termites that appeared in the home that I was renting at the time.
Oh dear.
And my slumlords were being just as proactive as you might imagine they would be about that type of thing, which was really frustrating, obviously. But it was like when I came home and I saw, because they swarm periodically.
Okay.
Right. So when I came home and I saw the swarm for the first time, obviously I'm like, bummer, I'm gonna have to take care of this. But also I was like, this is the book though. This has to be in the book. So I was contradictory feelings on that.
Right. I mean, yeah, you talk about defeatism and kind of looking at the world like that is the world in microcosm. Hey, guys whose job it is to fix this thing, there is something that is literally eating my home. Can you please fix it, as is your job? And then they say no.
Right. Which brings me back to talk about craft and competence, right? Like I want to live in it feels like a weird reason to talk about with poetry, but like I want to use poetry to channel a more competent world.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, good poetry. There is a type of poetry that is not so, that is like, I don't know, all the alt-lit stuff, not all the alt-lit stuff. The listener knows what I mean when I'm talking about alt-lit poetry and how it's one way. But like, aside from that, my general conception of poetry is that it is like, it requires a competence with language that is like self creating, like, because poetry is an exercise of language more so than prose is, where prose is like an exercise of like storytelling first and foremost. And it feels to me like the difference is that poetry is an exercise in language first and foremost. That like, yeah, it's a leading by example sort of thing that you're doing. It's like, look, we can be competent in language, which means we can be competent in action.
Right. Well, I think a lot of my thinking about the value of literature comes from like this maybe aspect of the Enlightenment that I think people don't talk about or maybe consider. There was a book I read a few years ago called Voltaire's Bastards, which it's a really, really long book and it's very meandering. And like looking back, I can't say I was like, wow, I burned like 2 months of my life reading this book. But I will say the author, John Ralston Saul, makes a really good point. He says that the original project of the Enlightenment was to bring rationality and knowledge to like a mass of people so that they could educate themselves and would no longer be like in the thrall of mystic kings that would use obfuscations in order to maintain their power. Like, I am the king because I talked to the Pope and he says that God loves me the most, or I'm like kind of God a little bit. And what the Enlightenment aimed to do and was able to do in part in a corrupted way was poke a hole in that. So from like becoming closer to language, I sometimes call it the axis of the earth. It's like reference to an Osip Mandelstam poem, if there's any Mandelstam heads listening. But getting closer to language, I feel like, provides you with an emancipatory power that otherwise is forfeit. So that's my like, it's part of my thinking on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. The axis of the earth is something that's referenced in the book a couple times too. So you've now answered that question for me as well. I want to talk about the third section, Wendigos in Love, because like that's funny to me. The name is funny to me because, again, you don't really think. It occurs to me Wendigos fit the grotesque category, and then again, right, we've discussed that grotesque feels it's too close to the word gross, so then putting love on that image adds a tension there, and also just like if you're only looking at the titles, I love my job is one that sticks out. I love this city, which is like not something that you expect a young poet to be saying.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. So the thinking for the titles there, the best way to explain this sequence. One form of defeatism, I think, is rather than addressing the very real problems extant in somebody's life, what they'll do is they'll attach themselves to somebody else, often in like a romantic way, right? They'll find some romantic attachment, and this will supplant whatever energy they would be using to like address the, let's just say, the mill collapsing around them, right? So what you would do is you would attach yourself to a romantic relationship in lieu of like addressing real problems. You would seek out like an obliterative pleasure, it rather than like facing things head on, which is also widespread in the 2020s and is one of the things that the 21st century will be remembered for more than anything else. So I wanted to have a speaker who was functioning in that way. And the simplicity of the titles was to mirror the simplification that requires, right? So I'm just going to dissolve myself into a platitude so I don't have to deal with the unsustainability of this way of life. We could even say like that someone's like own ineptitude. Like I'm going to cover that up with this veil of like love, which is often assigned like a pure status, if that's just devastatingly untrue.
Right.
So that was my thinking for that.
Sure.
Sequence.
You're describing like one of the underlying horrors in the movie Obsession.
Oh yeah, I saw that not too long ago. That was a very fun movie.
Yeah, it was so great. Nervous laughter in a theater is delightful. We just saw it. We saw it on would have been 2 days ago from recording, so we were late to the game. But I got a 4-year-old. I can't go see the movies whenever I want.
For a 4-year-old.
But yeah, that was there's a lot of things at work in that movie that I think. Obsession, like the Barbie movie, has a lot more going on in it than people give it credit for, because the themes that are in the forefront are speaking to frustrations that so many people have, that it's easy to just be like, finally, there's a frustration that is being spoken into existence by someone, in power enough to make a movie. But like the nuance, the counter ideas that are happening are deeper. Those my wife and daughter love the Barbie movie, so I have seen the Barbie movie, I think 500 times, and if not exactly, very close. And like I keep this is a huge tangent, but again, we just watched it today. There's the episode of How I Met Your Mother, old millennials will know, where they're on a road trip, but there's a cassette stuck in the stereo and it just plays 500 Miles by the Proclaimers. And the joke of the episode is how their opinion of the song changes, and how one of the characters who has been on road trips with this car, like, will tell the other character, like, you hate the song now, but just wait, it'll come back around. And I'm very much that way with the Barbie movie, where it's like, I'll get into a headspace where I feel like it's not very good at all, and I can't understand why anyone would like it, and all of the accolades it has gotten, at least like for the text, if not necessarily the filmmaking. It's a very beautiful film, and I'll always feel that way. But like, any of the accolades the text itself has gotten, I'll be like, but no, all of those things are wrong about the movie, and in fact, you must not have ever actually watched the movie. And then it'll come back around and it'll say, okay, wait, no, that's actually all those things are true. Yeah, again, we got way off track. I have big feelings about the Barbie movie, apparently.
No, that is fascinating. You know what? I haven't seen it. And I know everybody was I didn't do the Barbenheimer thing because I remember everybody was doing that.
We did.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of it had less to do with the Barbie movie, but who directed Oppenheimer? Was that Christopher Nolan?
Christopher Nolan. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of have like mixed feelings about his whole thing, so I just wasn't that excited for it, and I was busy at the time. But I met a guy who worked on the Barbie movie, and he was really nice. So that's my only attachment to it for now.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Um, I it's I feel like more of a joke than a truth at this point, but I'm a huge Ryan Gosling fan, so like I got no problem watching the movie because I think that he's a fantastic actor.
He's he is in one of my favorite movies, like The Believer. Have you seen The
I've seen
Believer?
The Believer. Yes.
I loved The Believer, and he does a great job in that for sure.
Tell me about that. I also I think it's a great movie, but I hasten to say that I love it. So I want to know. I need to know
So
more.
like it is pretty politically fraught, I guess, in some ways. Obviously, you see some stuff depicted on screen that's, I guess, don't try this at home, kids, in a variety of ways.
Word.
Um, I think that he gives a really magnetic performance in it. I think that there was a certain degree of foreshadowing future cultural trends in that film that could also be overestimated, but is there, right? Um, it's a tragedy, right? I love tragedy. I think tragedy has an important narrative social role, and I think it is like a compelling tragedy. There's plenty of stuff in the script that you could probably like poke all types of holes in politically. But
Sure.
I also think I watched it when I was like, this was early on in my like movie watching life. I
Yeah.
was like 17 or 18 when I saw it, and I was like, whoa. But
Hmm.
I maybe if I saw it later, I would not feel as enamored by it.
It really worked for me at the time. I'm gonna spoil The Believer, so spoilers for a 26-year-old movie or whatever. Um, the idea, I understand. There's not really a Jewish conception of hell, but his afterlife of being late and running up the stairs perpetually. Um, the idea of being stuck on a staircase perpetually was a huge terrifying image for me. In one of my creative writing classes, I like wrote a horror story about being stuck on stairs, and then a couple years later I was asked by a friend who went to a different college to help out with a like a 48-hour short film contest thing, and I wrote and ended up turning into a hallway. But it was about a girl who was stuck in a hallway. She would reach the end, head up the stairs, and then we would cut, and she'd be at the beginning of the stairway again, and you'd watch her break down and try different things. And so yeah, like The Believer works for me for like this minuscule moment at the end, but also like what a crazy concept for a film that again like yeah is kind of there's something weird happening now 20 some years later in real life. um i want I want to rein myself back in here again with the Wendigo is in love, like the best day of my life, which is one of the few poems in that section that is not I love thing, um is like a horrific poem.
What's horrific about it, Joe?
Woke up to the tar in her mouth is the first line that gets its own
Oh yeah.
stanza. Um, and then ends with wherever she squats and wherever we scorch your earth useless is intense to me as well. Um, and I guess, yeah, like one of the things that is always fascinating to me talking to poets about poetry, and I've been pretty clear about this, that I'm like not confident when it comes to like talking about poems. I'm not a confident poetry fan. Um, but yeah, like going through it after just like the bit you've told me about it, and my eyes glazing over the poems as I flick through. It's just like, oh yeah, no, of course. um, so let's do that with the Blue Cherub of Light's Passage. I was very excited about this part because I had recently been thinking about long poems. Every time I go to Barnes and Noble, I see in the poetry section, because it's so big, the Fairy Queen, that English poem that's like hugely long. And recently we went and I saw it, and I thought to myself, writing long poems is so hard though. And I understand that, like, that's a narrative. And I am, in this world of literature where people will put out a book of poems where the poems don't have titles, and so they can kind of easily blend together as like one thing, or it's a book-length poem, or it's a hybrid whatever. But because you have contextualized with 3 other sections of shorter poems that are a page long or thereabouts, to get something that's 20 pages was exciting to me, because it was like, oh, it's this thing I've been thinking of. So talk about that section, and then I can see if what I missed.
No, so I mean, I was looking to do in that long form poem in relation to the rest of the book was I wanted some fusion of all the motifs at the end. So I wanted to combine each of these features and explode them in some way. One of the things that I really appreciate about, we were talking about film, about that form, is filmmakers appreciate scope and massivity. And filmmakers are that's the genre of art where people seem the least reticent to be grandiose, right? So I wanted to have a concluding section of the book that gave the collection a feeling of completion and massivity. I was listening to, maybe this would be your taste, Joe, the band Swans, the live version of Blood Promise that they have on one of their albums is so amazing to me. They're playing the same chord over and over again for a solid like 7 minutes. It's the same drum beat and the same chord. And they're like slowly tweaking other aspects of their music to build up to this like atmospheric climax. And I was really inspired by that structure, and having this sense of massivity in the book was important to me. I think when we talk about bitterness and defeatism as driving cultural factors, part of that comes from how small and needling so much of like contemporary life is, and how whiny and sharp and playing into a short attention span so much contemporary media is. Like when an advertisement comes on in like the middle of a movie that you're watching or something, it shatters the sense of the our dog is really either fucking with me or not enjoying what I'm saying at all.
My wife is clearly just coming home from the grocery store, so he's happy everyone's back in the same house.
Oh, that's awesome. Hell yeah. Anyway, so I wanted to have this sense of massivity, and I wanted to wind through all the motifs. This was the most spontaneous of the 4 sequences. Like I wrote it almost free association for the first drafts, and then I wrote it all throughout the production of the other 3 sequences. So the motifs that I would use like in those other sequences, I would like find places to press them into the long form poem. I don't know if there's a specific way I could explain that section, but I wanted that sense of scope and massivity and completion at the end of my book, and that was how I thought I could do it.
We turn my knobs back up so the dog everyone's in the house. Yeah, I like that. I kind of noticed that, right? Like the cherubs are coming back, my children are coming back, termites are there. I liked how you would, I guess, repeat lines. I mean, you would repeat lines. You would take something from like the end of one page, ever receives when I shower every morning, and then the next page would start with when I shower every morning. And you didn't do it a lot, but you did it enough that it like had this bridging effect that I enjoyed. And because like again, it's a long poem, but like on these pages, there's a space. What the like these could be their own poems, but I read them as one with the extra space on the page acting as kind of a super line break. But in your formatting, maybe you had a different idea.
Yeah, so I did think of it as like a long form, one single long form poem. And you're right that part of the reason that I had those repeat lines was to establish continuity. I did it more at the beginning of the poem than I did towards the end because I just wanted to demonstrate, like, okay, you're still looking at the same thing. This is one like stream of consciousness that we're exploring. And the repetition also gave this like circular effect, right? So the speaker is like trapped in like this like bitter memory, and they are encountering these images repeatedly in the bitter memory, and it's not blunted for them. It's just as real from moment to moment.
I feel like I would be remiss. Geez, I feel like I would be remiss if we didn't mention Grotto before we end here. A sort of it is your journal you're doing with this Maxwell Rab. It's a journal of surrealist grotesque poetics. Go ahead and say a little bit about it. It's been going on for a while. You got 8 issues out. So I'm interested to hear you talk about that before we get out of here.
Yeah, it's been I suppose 3.5 years since we started it. I like working with Max a lot. We were both living in Chicago at the time, and we were both like talking a lot about small press poetry, online journals, and we had a lot of the same thoughts about what would be worthwhile to put out. So eventually we just like came together and like made this project. And then we immediately moved to different cities. Like he moved to New York and I moved to Baltimore. So from there, it's been a little bit more of a long distance thing. I remember vaguely hatching the idea. I was at my like go nowhere temp job. I worked the front desk at like a tech company in Chicago. And it was at the end of COVID, so nobody was coming in. So most of my job was functionally just to sit there and like read Proust all day. And I was like, a magazine shut down, Typo Mag, which had published a bunch of writers that I really like. They put out their last issue. And I was like, oh, well, if these journals keep closing, I'm not going to have anywhere to like share my work anymore. And I thought one way to combat that was to like think of a specific aesthetic tilt that was valuable to me, and then make a place for it. And I didn't know what that would look like. I'd never like used the web hosting software before, but Max is like, no, it's not actually as complicated as you might think, and was able to like demonstrate how it was possible for us. So really grateful to him for that. We have an issue coming out soon. I think we said October, but it might actually be earlier because we have all those poems, like all the contributors are there. And we're still open for submissions if anybody is listening and they think they might have something that would qualify. I'd love to read it. I very rarely do intros for individual poems that I read, but this is actually, it's funny, Joe, that you pointed this one out, because this was the first or second poem that I wrote in the book that I ended up putting in a different place. But this served as the basis for the book in a lot of ways. So the poem is called The Best Day of My Life. Woke up to the tar in her mouth, like a pig, catastrophic, ripe, cathectic. Her chile bleeding through, holes in the floorboards, beasts without futures, chewing their trough flies. I rivet to the blue light with the cloud's emptiness, to let her swill thrawn me, and I'll smile big saccharine smiles wherever she squats and wherever we scorch your earth useless.